Hello, welcome everyone. I'm the Service Director and co-founder of the Institute for Future Work. And today we are launching a fantastic firm-level survey of more than 100 firms, carried out by James Hayton, Professor James Hayton, from the Business School as part of the Pissarides review into work and being, supported by the Nuffield Foundation, and examining how automation technologies, including AI, but not just AI, are transforming work, society, and the economy. This is a landmark survey, we think, for a number of reasons, including particularly significant findings. I'm not going to say very much, James, I'm just going to try this. But go to the pace and nature and scope of the adoption, including, for example, SMEs and small companies, make us think, help us think more sharply about the conditions and environment in which we can get the best outcome, and begin to get really under the bonnet about the relationship between conditions and organisational conditions in the environment and organisational conditions too, and take us to think more closely about some of the real potential of automation as well as benefits, including the improvement of work quality and also job creation. So we have a fantastic panel we want to talk to them. We're going to start off, of course, with Professor Hayton, Professor of Innovation and Human Resource Management at Warwick Business School, with a special interest in the future of work, and as well as lead academic on this particular survey, editor-in-chief on human resource management. We've also joined by Khareghani, who's Professor of Practice in AI at King's, former head of the Office of AI and the UK Government, and set it up for years, and is now policy lead of the very exciting new government programme, Responsible AI, which is just kicking off, and we will be hearing more about it. In a sense, this survey is the business case for responsible AI, or sets us up perhaps in the right direction. And the answer certainly is the wonderful Dr Abby Gilbert, who's Director of Praxis, that means practice in Greek for IFOW, and an experienced multidisciplinary researcher and practitioner with a particular focus on action research, and currently leading on the exciting establishment of IFOW's initiative. So we're going to structure this with a presentation from James for about 10 minutes. We're then going to have a panel discussion between us, which I get to kick off, and then we will, as soon as we can, open this up to the floor. Thank you.
You've done with them stand up, because I can't speak, so I'm glad to have to stand up. I am James Hayton from Warwick Business School. Really delighted to have the chance to present the result of the survey, which we feel was kind of an oh wow moment, because it really did the hypotheses that we had all were supported in the data. So let me run through. 10 minutes is not long for an academic to present a paper like this, but I should do my best. So we had a survey. We actually had 1,012 firms responding to the survey. We were interested in the questions primarily: did they adopt technology in the last 3 years for automation of physical tasks and/or automation of cognitive tasks? So we had 2 separate sets of questions there. We were really interested not just in whether and how extensive the adoption was, but not just the extent of adoption, but then what is the impact in terms of job creation and deletion, skills addition, so I should say the number of positions. So we differentiate positions from jobs, because any particular job may have a number of positions within any organisation. So we want to be able to check on both of those, the impact on skills and the impact on job quality. And this is already quite distinct from prior research, which has tended to focus on the destruction of jobs, how many jobs will be disrupted, and has rarely asked the question of how many jobs are created. We focus, so when you think about technology and you ask decision makers about technology, you quickly come to realize that the technology is not an objective thing, but it's the perception of the technology that actually matters. Different people will have different perceptions about technology, and it's those perceptions that influence their decisions of whether or not to adopt. So we measured the perceptions. In particular, there are three, from years of research in this field on technology adoption, three core perceptions that we know matter. Will the technology give you a relative advantage over existing ways of operating? Is it complex, or is it understandable? And is it something that's compatible with your existing operations? These are the core questions that tend to differentiate whether or not you adopt technology. So we investigated that. One of the central pieces of this research is the impact of context. And this has been studied to some degree cross-nationally, but very rarely studied internationally, so regionally. And then we're interested in whether there are regional differences in technology adoption and the impacts, which I'll come to in the results. We also look at, well, what are the key drivers of the decision to adopt? So what influences those perceptions? And there's a whole raft of research for many, many decades with a number of key factors. We included all of those factors, but we focused deeply on human resource management, because the idea here is that whether you make significant investments in your workforce through human resource management practices, creates a resource in the organization that will influence your perceptions of, can we leverage this technology for better performance? Will people accept the technology and be flexible and work with that technology? So whether you have a high road or versus a low road approach to human resource management is going to be an important driver of whether you have positive perceptions about technology. And as I noted, we go beyond simply the number of jobs that are impacted to thinking more broadly about the impact on job quality, because you may create more jobs, but if you're creating poor quality jobs, then that may not necessarily be a net positive for society. So, thank you. The survey was conducted by telephone interviews supplemented with computer support, with online surveys. We looked at organisations with more than 20 employees because we consider that to be the group above which there will be more formal management practices to look at. So if you get down into the micro firms, which are many orders of magnitude more micro firms with small numbers of employees, you see less technology adoption, less formalisation of practices. So we're interested in that. It's still small, from 20 employees up until the largest firms. And we measured, of course, the adoption of technology and the impacts on work, as well as the perceptions, and then this concept of regional innovation readiness, which is our metric of understanding the environment, which I'll describe in a second. And that leverages research that's going on within the Pissarides project generally, which is creating a thing called the Disruption Index, and I'll explain very briefly when we get to that point. And we measured the human resource management philosophy and practices. We were particularly interested in investments in training. Do you consult with your employees on technology adoption? Do you provide information about new technologies to your employees? And do you empower your employees? Right? Then all of those things sort of converge so that you've got all of them. You have a very high investment, high commitment approach. So forgive this a bit of an academic description, but this is the first of two models that we look at. This is the prediction of technology adoption, and we hypothesize that the perceptions of technology will be an important driver of technology adoption, and those are driven in turn by the ways in which you manage your people, even controlling for all the other factors that prior research says are important, like organizational size, the sector you're in, the decision maker's perception of strategic necessity, and so do your customers need it, do your competitors use it, and is there external support? Go to the next slide, I'll start talking about the results. So overall, we're seeing very close to 80% of firms are adopting for physical or cognitive tasks. Incredibly high rate of adoption going on in the environment according to this survey. The Overall picture is that we get net positive impact on job creation and skills, and also net positive impacts on job quality. Next slide, please. So, as we expect, as we hypothesize, those technology perceptions do mediate the relationship between management practices and the decision to adopt. When you've got that high involvement in HRM, that significantly predicts your perceptions of the technology in terms of the positive perceptions, which in turn explains the relationship between human resource management and the decision to adopt. There are slight differences and quite interesting, important ones. In general, historically, we found that larger firms are more likely to adopt technologies and innovate than smaller firms. And that was the case for the automation of physical tasks. But for cognitive tasks, so if you think about what software is doing, it's automating our cognitive tasks, size doesn't matter. So this is significant because it's saying, actually, this isn't just a large firm issue, this is across the economy, across all sectors, across all sizes. There is a high rate of adoption of technology to automate cognitive tasks. This means any impacts are going to be more widely felt, because of course, half the workforce are in SMEs, and so the other half in large firms. And so more people are going to be impacted by this technology adoption. And we see a significant effect, there's a significant effect whether your positive perceptions of technology on adoption, regardless of whether it's cognitive or physical task. So the second framework, check my watch and make sure I'm not rambling on here, but this is really the key result. The second framework is looking at very similar framing, the technology perceptions in the middle, and then we look at outcomes on jobs, positions, skills, and quality. But what you've got in addition here is the moderating effect. So this is innovation readiness. This is the regional variable. And what a moderator does is change the strength of a relationship between perceptions and outcomes, right? If we go to the next slide. So I said I'd explain regional innovation readiness. This is actually not from the survey, this is from the disruption index. It's coming from a range of secondary data sources. And it's one component of the wider disruption index that's looking at these regional enablers of innovation. It's got two key dimensions, human capital and technology infrastructure. And you can pick it out here. We've got the sub-dimensions, the basic skills, investment in education, post-secondary education, adult education, workforce composition, and a number of indicators from diverse sources of each of those. And then investments in technology infrastructure around 4G coverage, the quality of the internet connection across the region, and how much high-speed internet is available and the range of internet users. So it's an indicator of the sort of penetration of technology within the region. It's a proxy variable. And as you would expect, the regional innovation readiness is different across the regions, and you see this in the map. So no surprise really, that London has the highest score on that variable. And then you'll see, of course, the second and third city effects. But as you go to the periphery geographically of the country, that readiness score drops. And this is an important variable. So if we go to the next slide, this is actually just depicting the whole disruption index. So we're used drawing just from that central pillar, and there'll be future work coming out that's integrating all of those elements of technological disruption in the economy. So here's the key, the results in terms of impacts. The impacts on jobs. So when we look at a moderator effect, we can plot the relationship for a low level of readiness, an average level of readiness, and a high level of readiness. And what you see here is that from that plot. So the relationship between technology and technology perceptions and the impact on jobs is strongly significant when readiness is high. So there's a positive impact on net job creation when regional readiness is high. When regional readiness is low, there's no significant relationship. So regional readiness, innovation readiness matters for facilitating a positive impact on net job creation from the adoption of AI and automation technology. This is what this sort of result of academic enjoy getting from it. This is very strongly supporting the hypothesis. We get the same result when we ask about positions, right? So to illustrate this, the position of professor at WBS, and then we've got 50 professors at WBS. Sorry, the job of professor in 50 positions. But the same relationship. The high levels of readiness, we see a significant relationship between technology perceptions and that net positive impact on the creation of positions. So there are positions being deleted, and there are jobs being deleted, but there's more jobs being created in net. Go to the next one. On skills, you see exactly the same pattern. So the impact is significantly positive when readiness is high, but when readiness is low, below average, you have no impact. So interesting, there's no negative impact. But when we turn to the next on job quality, this was really exciting to see from my perspective, because, well, it's maybe a little bit worse as an outcome, but what it's saying is, yeah, when readiness is high, the jobs that are being created, or the jobs in general in the organization, will tend to have a net improvement in quality. Quality in terms of maybe compensation, access to hours, fairness, meaning challenge, right? Intrinsic quality. So that's improved when readiness is high. So employers are enhancing with technology the quality of work. But when readiness is low, below average, there's a negative effect. So the adoption of technology at that point may be creating jobs, but if it is, it's the jobs with the net lower quality as you go out. And so again, from an academic perspective, that's exciting. From a practical perspective, that's a bit worrying. And it does significantly implicate this variable of regional innovation readiness, quality of investment in the workforce and infrastructure as a contingency that is going to influence whether technology is having a good or a negative effect, particularly around job quality, which is something that hasn't really been looked at in prior research around the future of workspace, understanding that. I think that's probably a wrap-up slide. And lots of words on here, but try and wrap that up quickly. Perceptions matter. Perceptions are driven by HR. The impact of those perceptions is to enhance adoption. Adoption is high, but the thing that moderates whether that impact has a positive or negative effect on the number of jobs and the quality of jobs is that regional readiness variable. So this is probably supportive of the arguments around the levelling up agenda. I think that's the whirlwind tour.
That's fantastic. Just one thing, noticing that we've got in the room.
Yes.
Would it be possible to remind us of the definitions of this before we start the
The
conversation?
definitions of
The AI information, very roughly.
so I mean we in terms of the question, paraphrasing loosely, we said, have you adopted AI or robotic automation technologies to automate cognitive tasks in the last 3 years? And similarly, the same question for physical tasks in the last 3 years. So it's a window of the last 3 years. And this, by the way, salient point, I suppose, the survey was completed last July, so it's prior to the massive rush in generative AI that started about in November. So we should imagine that adoption is accelerating.
So conveniently for our panel, there are the two main areas that it's interesting to think about. It's regional inequality and human resources and organisation management, of course, but perhaps very close to that, your expertise, governance as a value. So we have to kick off You could vote, speaking, having to read the meeting like the policies and so on that to governments, to firm governments. You could share a few words about what you've taken the implications are in that space.
Well, I just start off by saying I'm floored by the findings. I think it's amazing to see. It goes a long way to kind of backing up a lot of the things that we believed, but haven't had kind of empirical data to prove or to point us in the direction. And it also opens up an enormous area of further exploration, which I'm really excited about as well, especially for the responsible AI work that we're doing. But from the, if we think for a minute about what we mean when we talk about responsible AI, it's a term right now that's being used quite a lot, akin to ethics washing and energy washing or climate sustainability things. For us, responsibility is really to be, it's meant to be an inclusive term. So it's not taking just looking at things from a technology perspective or from a safety perspective alone, but opening that up and looking at the responsibility it takes to introduce new technology, to adopt that technology, the end of life, the responsibility you have about the imprint that leaves on the environment, all of those things fit into that bucket, and as well as the interdisciplinary and the diversity of the people, both in the creation of it, but in the adoption of it and so on. So it's quite an inclusive word. And it's, again, I would say, I find these findings brilliant because it shows that inclusivity is useful in making the adoption work in a positive or in a net positive manner. That was my one first takeaway. The second was really around, and I've just lost my train of thought. Around the positive implications. So we talked about future of work, and I was saying this in the back of the room, from a policy perspective. So last year, from a policy perspective, future of work when it comes to AI in terms of adoption. So we know that the adoption of these technologies has a very positive impact, or at least we're told has a massively positive impact from an economic perspective for the world or for each individual country. But there's this looming worry about what that means for the future of work. What is the adoption of these technologies actually? How does that impact the workforce? How does it change the type of work that we're doing? And so another positive takeaway for me for this study, and which opens up a whole new area of work, is it's actually not as worrying maybe as we originally thought, that there is the ability for new jobs to be created, and actually systematically working towards managing our employees and responsibly introducing these technologies rather than what we tend to hear, which is sprinkling this on top of what's already being done. We're not really asking yourself, just because I can, should I introduce these technologies, or in fact asking, how does this change my organization? How do I embed these new technologies in the way that we're working with your workforce in order to do that shows that there is a massive impact. And so this for me is a policy area that's understood at least, rather than feared. And so I see this as a positive start to looking at some questions that we can actually address. So both from an academic perspective, but also from a policy perspective.
So the potential is that, if the right approach and conditions are in place, that we can't assume it will happen. Yes, it's not, but that we have routes to forefront as a means of a bridge to getting that. Indeed, and I am very excited to be positive. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. On region, are you this important thing?
Well, I suppose Yeah, what's exciting about this work is that it remarks that there is no singular form of automation. I think we understand automation as a way in which work is transformed. And that those different outcomes, which aren't predetermined, are shaped both by the firm themselves. So the firm is one point of intervention to begin to create an environment for reflection and, and the course in which the impacts are determined, with involvement of workers shaping that perception, which I think is a really important part of the study. But then also that there is this second tier of intervention around kind of place-based factors that then shape that. I think I haven't come across in the literature before. I think it's a great innovation by James working with Berta, work that was trying to think about that relationship between the place-based and the socio-technical within the faculty. I think that's a rich contribution into that kind of academic realm as well as the policy conversation. So I suppose, I think the findings that are most prescient and that we would worry about in terms of a continual erosion of job quality without intervention are around that kind of the consolidation of regional inequalities and access to good work, which obviously we've looked at in other ways and other projects, and know that there is a non-equal distribution of access to good work already across the country. But that would happen by these different types of automation that are perhaps reducing the demand for skill and probably changing aspects of discretion. And that, for me, I think links this with a literature review that was published earlier in the Pissarides review that's trying to address this question of perceptions more directly by thinking about, well, what types of form can automation take? Noting that there is the kind of job task and job creation, task substitution and job displacement, but then also other kind of outcomes that reflect different ways of capturing productivity gains within a learning process. But with different types of trade-off for job quality. I suppose we need to have more architectures to reflect on that at the point of adoption for them to address these cumulative effects as the choices by firms play out in those markets and then markets shape further.
I guess connecting, sorry,
I wanted to ask you a question actually, just very quickly. Were there regional differences in the percentage of firms adopting AI? So the overall was 80%, but did you see more of that happening in London than elsewhere?
Actually, we didn't analyse by, so we included geography in through that regional innovation readiness variable. So we didn't look at it categorically and looked at sector categorically. Then you would imagine there's some correlation between the sectors and the geography. But actually, particularly on the cognitive class, so we're talking about AI, or even more direct application of AI, there weren't significant differences across sectors in the rate of adoption for problems or tasks. There were predictably for physical tasks, as you would expect. But that's again so in terms of the size of firms and the sectors they're operating in, it's very, very widespread. So at 80%, I don't think you'd see huge, you might see some marginal regional differences. But we didn't actually analyse it categorically just because of modelling of it would be too many categories.
a couple of questions close to what we think about at the moment is definitely. I'm picking up on what you've called that the point on high practices and so on. There's lots of discussion about what we should do about that, and often it surfaces in the context of debates about rights and the need to perhaps sharpen and bolster regulation of that. I should say this is not part of it. This is an early exploration. We're very much at an implication stage as part of the review. Does it suggest to you that we should also flip that round and think about the positive case for governance, for sharper governance, given the benefits at a firm level, and as well as an individual level?
Well, I mean, it's interesting to do that, and I mean, I can only give you my own opinion, because I do think that this is an area that we need to explore. There's work to be done here, but yes, I think in general, yes, it's been my experience in industry that when a technology sticks, it's when people are ready to adopt it and when they've been told for that. And it not only sticks, but they understand how to use it and why it's useful to their. Otherwise, they ignore it or it becomes a checkbox exercise. Obviously, with these kind of disruptive technologies, it also changes the face of the work that they do, the importance of their own role in these tasks, right? So when part of your work gets automated, if you're not brought in at the start, you don't understand your value anymore in that end to end. So that kind of putting in the governance, whether it's, you know, involvement of, you know, to what level your employees are involved in the decision making versus the understanding of why this technology, that's to be debated. And also probably depends on what you're doing and how much that's disrupting and so on and so forth. But the involvement of your workforce in understanding why these steps are being taken and what the advantages are from the perception that you set out, James, earlier, I think helps a lot. There's a flip side to this, obviously, that, you know, a few years ago, we had these things called shadow IT when people wanted to do this and they weren't allowed because there wasn't enough money for storage or whatever. When we went to the cloud, well, that became really cheap. And so people started to have their own places where things got stored. And this became, you know, a part of the world. And so we might have a similar situation where the company may not automate, but actually the people who are working there may automate their own roles to make their lives easier. So I think this governance has positives from both sides, right? And you may end up in a place where a lot of your workers are using generative AI to help them do the work, and you know nothing about it. And so, you know, I think it's important. This is an important exploration to be.
And one, I guess, I'm not going to say, but what does it tell us, if anything, about how to situate the summit coming up? And you know, its potential scope, perhaps. And the importance of bringing in work like this into the conversation.
So, I mean, I think it's such a good question. I think there is a lot around the summit. There's a lot of questions, there's a lot of opinions about, you know, the scope of the summit, what the summit is covering, whether it needs to be broader in scope, et cetera, who's involved, who's at the table. All of these things I think are important. I think also important to consider and recognize there's a very short period of time before a very, very important summit that's happening. Now, I'm no longer involved, obviously, directly with the work the government is doing on this, but I think, you know, for me, yes, obviously, I think the area that should be covered is much wider than the existential risk or the frontier technologies or the safe AI, whatever you want to call it, that kind of top end. The work is much wider than that. And a lot of it has been going on for many years, and there's a lot of funding and a lot of solutions that we have to offer the international community, especially from the UK's and the work that we've been leading here. And I will say, regardless of what, and I'm using and instead of what here on purpose, regardless of what the summit covers, it is a positive step in the right direction. And, you know, if you don't have time to cover all of those topics, I think moving on to them and setting the right precedents, instead showing that the UK's leadership is a positive thing, and we can bring those people around the table and then get them to come back again. It's no bad thing.
Resistance section. Do ask more, focus around, and open this up for questions to anyone that may wish to take up this fantastic opportunity to speak to you both, James and Sana together with the
Thank you so much for the lovely panel of ingredients for presenting the research. My question was regarding the sectors, because you touched upon it, but I'm not sure if it was actually specified. I'd be really keen to hear what kind of sectors you kind of interview people across, and if you found any vast differences, of course, in some more than the others, but how do they sort of scale out between other tech versus non-tech sectors in terms of adoption of data?
So you measured sectors at the SIC level, the highest level, and for the adoption of the automation technology for physical tasks, it would tend to be in the manufacturing, of course, and mining and agriculture and so on, where you'd expect it to be. So there were greater differences between sectors there. There were far fewer differences between sectors for the adoption of technology for cognitive tasks. It's suggesting that there's an equal rate of adoption. There weren't significant differences, or there were very small, statistically significant differences. But it was clearly, and it's presented in the white paper, in the working paper. And we used sectors as controls. We didn't have specific hypotheses related to sector, although there's still work that we can do to look at that and to look at sectoral differences more systematically. But within the space of one study, you choose to focus, and we focus primarily on geography and on the management practices. But yeah, it's likely that management practices also differ systematically across sectors. And I've done prior work when it was peers, looking at similar questions there and finding differences in the adoption of the high involvement of HRM according to sector. But that's more prevalent in more knowledge-rich, more competitive sectors, and less prevalent in the less competitive and less knowledge-rich sectors.
They both of these last two.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering, I'm interested in the workers' perceptions around good work and job quality. Based on your presentation, my impression is that the way you try to access employee perceptions around job quality was through human resource management.
Yes, so just to be clear, we did not, in this part of the study, we did not interview workers. So this was a survey of the decision makers, usually chief operating officers and similar executives around the decision to adopt. We screened them ahead of time to make sure they could answer questions about their management practices and the adoption of technology. And it's their estimate. So you can also take that to be, well, perhaps there's potential for some social desirability there, but there's still widely varying responses. So it suggests that there's a degree of validity to those self-reports. But we have underway some case studies where we are interviewing all stakeholders, employees, the managers responsible for actually operating the new technology, those making decisions to implement it, and that should come out next summer with about a dozen different case studies across different sectors.
Thank you. And perhaps as a PS to add to that, not only is James' analysis ongoing, but it's part of a series of work streams that are going to be coming out over the next year. The next one is an individual survey looking at work capabilities. We happen to have, in fact, the Professor who is leading that work stream, should you wish to pick that conversation up. Happy to answer that. Good question, and then we'll pull it together in order to get to all perspectives.
Thank you very much for the presentation. So my main question is that what was your definition of AI when you conducted this survey? Because this is the most important thing, that what people think AI is. So there was recently a report from the Office of National Statistics, and they show that only about 72% people are able to partially define what AI actually is. So when you put the question to a company like whether you have used AI or robotics or automation in the last few years, So it's a very loose question.
Yes.
In my opinion. So why didn't we go into the specifics of this? Because otherwise, how can you understand what AI technology they have used? It can be something like somebody, let's say, I'm utilizing something on my mobile phone to run my business, so that can also be considered AI.
Yes,
Or
that's the point. So if you ask a if we, first of all, there isn't an agreed on definition of AI, right? So even AI scholars, academics are debating whether it's AI or not AI. So it's not productive in a 20-minute interview to get into that level of detail when we're interested in the general adoption of any algorithmic technology, right? So at that point, we didn't have widely available generative AI products, so we didn't have to worry about that. But it's, AI is, are there any algorithmic based tools within the software you're using, for example? Or are you using it to manage your people? Are you using it to manage your processes? You could challenge it, but I think that the important thing is to get a general sense of the adoption of these broad set of technologies as a family, rather than say, okay, that's in and that's out, because that's probably going to introduce more error, because it will depend on the capability, the expertise of the respondent, as you've mentioned.
And one follow-up question is that this survey was done mainly during the pandemic. How do you think the pandemic has affected the results of this survey?
Our proposal for the research was developed during the pandemic, but actually once we started, we were a year post-pandemic, and the survey itself.
Yeah, you said that you asked the question that whether you have utilized AI or robotics or automation.
Oh, yes, during the years, yes, you're quite right. Yeah.
When you talk about 3 years, so it covers the period of pandemic.
Mhm.
So how do you think pandemic has affected this adoption of AI and robotics and automation?
It's likely to have accelerated it. There's all evidence is pointing to the idea that lots of technology adoption was accelerated during the pandemic to try to mitigate the challenges of human face-to-face working. So I mean, everything from Zoom, in Teams, which do incorporate AI and algorithms as well, to all sorts of things. Really. I mean, it's just a massive expansion. So on average, it would be an acceleration. That was a point of interest when we were initially pitching the research.
We have lots of follow-up questions on methodology. I suggest that we take this out and pick that up,
Thank you very much.
which would be very welcome. Although very quickly, perhaps we could remind the audience who it was we were interviewing. I know I've said I don't think.
Yes.
But we,
So-
is that any also go towards answering your question?
So we were interviewing executives. We focused on COOs, CTOs, or similar executives with an understanding of technology and understanding or involvement in the strategic decisions to adopt the technology. So it was at the executive level.
I think that's helpful. There are 3 questions, I think. Why is it that the time should we take them together and then you can all answer?
Just to please those online, if people could introduce themselves before they ask their question for those online.
Hold to the castle. We'll do it in the order in which the hands went up. So, gentlemen in the blue shirts on the right.
You may just ask my question. Sorry, I'm Alistair Brisbane, the head of technology research at ACCA, State Association for Certified Chartered Accountants. You may just answer my question here. I was curious whether there's any analysis by sort of function within the organization. So it occurs to me if you're a CFO and have compliance or reporting responsibilities, you might be more reluctant to automate processes versus a COO who's looking for efficiency and cost savings in the organization.
That is an excellent question to look at. We would expect there to be differences, but we didn't zoom in that closely. This is at the organizational level. So it's necessarily kind of a crude cut. And hopefully we'll get deeper dives in terms of the case studies. But even there, we're looking at a single technology in a single context. And we can provide policies that we are proposing.
And these two, these are slightly increased and these are about motivation, so I'm good. Okay.
Hello, I'm Hayton from the Recruitment and Employment Confederation. I'm just wondering if you think companies will need to hire younger managers to embrace AI properly?
I'm anti that perspective. As somebody in this fifties, you can quite easily come up with technology, and I think there's plenty of people we can. I don't hold to the generational hypothesis. I think it's bogus, and it simply reflects the fact that different generations grow up in a different technological milieu, so they are native to that milieu. But that doesn't mean that the earlier generation can't readily pick up. How many older generations using Facebook versus younger generation? Right? So I wouldn't buy that. But what you do have to do is invest in training and also in education prior to work, which will make it easier for people to adapt to these changing technologies. So
Yes, it does. Take us very directly to the training and theory question.
There's two questions online, if I could put those two. Yes, so it's Grantley Morgan from EY says, do we expect generative AI to be subject to the same regional moderating effect? Is one question. And then Jackie from Digit Sussex says, is one of the consequences of regional disparity to have policies to encourage tech adoption in terms of hardware, software in areas with low adoption, or reduce regional skills inequalities, or both? Yeah, do separately.
Generative AI, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be exactly the same pattern. It makes me think that, so you can either use generative AI to substitute, and we see that in some of our cases that we're doing, but also you can augment work with generative AI quite readily. In fact, it's a better model in many ways because generative AI needs to be supervised, right? You can't just ask it the answer and expect it to be correct. Somebody has to check it. So there's likely to be regional variation in successful leveraging or quality leveraging, and which would be augmenting labour, and it makes us more productive, right? We can do more stuff. You know, I've got many colleagues using it all the time, and they can do more stuff because very quickly we can have it right in paragraph, check this right, and so I think it'll be the same pattern.
Does the question speak to the findings about the degree of automation of cognitive tasks and the findings about SME adoption to you?
Yes, I mean the big takeaway here is that's going to be more widespread. It's the innovation adoption technology isn't going to be the domain of a few sectors and larger firms. It's across, because it's relatively easy to adopt that type of technology. It doesn't mean you have to change all of your work processes, which often when you're using robotic automation, it implies you have to change other work processes. And very often it's easier to use a whole system rather than drop in technologies when it's physical tasks. So it's much more constrained, whereas generative AI and similar will be, you can adopt them piecemeal more readily. So it's going to have it's looking like it's having a more widespread effect on the economy. And then there's that question of regional disparities.
Fantastic. And then
So
the second question.
Yeah, so the second question was about how we kind of get over those regional disparities. I will refresh you with the details. So is it about encouraging adoption of hardware and software in places of low adoption, or is it about reducing skills inequalities regionally, or does it need to be both?
Well, I suppose some of the evidence that we found in my work by the Institute has suggested that just having a supply of skilled labour even within a firm is enough to ensure that there is an adoption of technologies in a way that doesn't erode the overall demand for skills. And obviously there are incentives and pressures that firms face that might require them to do that in different ways, and philosophies of any whole that might lead them to do that in things, even if there wasn't abundant supply. So I suppose while it's really interesting that this finding suggests that if you have that human capital in a labour market, you're more likely to stay positive. There's also evidence to suggest that having a skilled workforce doesn't mean that you won't adopt in those ways. So it's not enough, I suppose, to say that to just pour in skills with the expectation of that. I suppose there's been some, we haven't come to the policy recommendation stage of this yet, or at the implication stage, so there's nothing sort of firm in this space, but looking at what's emerging in practice, there's obviously a big move to think about better matching as one solution to this kind of skills work question, and policy around that can be understood as linking skills policy and industrial policy, but there's now obviously a lot of technology providers that are thinking about dynamically linking the right kind of people with the right kind of skills with the right kind of jobs with the right kind of needs. I suppose that presents, that objectification of matching people presents new challenges that we also need to think about, as well as opportunities. And to pick up on the earlier question around the working perspective on this, it's I suppose also important to think about how we allow whatever this transition in labour markets is to accommodate workers and employers, and that's something that really has to be done with our broad monitoring upstream period.
Right. Any further questions? Shall we wrap up with final comments from the panelists? Maybe I'll try to have some favourite policy implications, and we can start thinking some other one that I can learn.
Maybe such a question.
Absolutely.
So, Warwick, universities and King's, very different careers departments. So we've become very much talking about how do we prepare our students for the world of work. So we've got versions running now, and we graduate in 3 or 4 years' time. And we're trying to predict what we need to be incorporating into our workshops, how do we prepare for the jobs that we don't know this again. Do you have any insights from your research and prediction?
Sort of corroborate to that in the context of career theories. I guess the sort of matching, skills matching theory, so we would regard it as quite an old career theory. So actually, in terms of if that's now sort of being looked at, how do we move that forward in relation to actually sort of bringing in some of the newer careers theories? Because we know that people are going to be in the workplace for 40, 50 years, and actually they're going to need to reskill and retrain. So the matching now is not going to be sort of being the end all for that. That's not going to serve them well for their entire working career.
I think we better open this up to have high level comments that go beyond this research only, whilst remembering that we're not at the recommendation stage. So this will be these will be personal observations at the highest level, perhaps a bullet point each for anyone who wants.
Yeah, so it's not a question I directly focus on. We do have a colleague at Warwick who's been deeply involved in predicting future skills for some time, and they seem to be focusing on sort of human skills. My understanding is that your ability to absorb new knowledge is dependent upon the knowledge base you have. So all else equal, having a better education, broad-based education to a high level will give you the sort of raw material for adapting to change. But then you have to be given the opportunity, right? So it's incumbent on employers and or states to provide those opportunities for retraining. And in fact, that is one of the core ideas around critical theories work, is what are the obstacles that people face in making these transitions? Where are the frictions in the labour market, geography, information and skills? So we have to be able to make sure we're providing in as many ways as possible opportunity to access, opportunity to develop skills, an opportunity to understand where those changes will come from. So we can't predict. Actually, we might guess, but we're probably going to be wrong half.
Any other observations?
Only one small one. So I did all my education in Canada and the US, and it's very different there. You can audit classes, you can take courses and get credit from other disciplines. There isn't a very strict boundary set on your courses. And that for me was it was kind of enlightening to see that there was such a staunch difference between still the way that university students here take courses and so on. And I think given the move we're making now from a research perspective into interdisciplinary areas, I think our undergrad students here in the UK should be allowed to do that. And so for me, there is, with the mindset of offering, not knowing what kind of skills you need, but offering the opportunity for students to see the implications for the studies they are undertaking. What are the implications given the movement in tech? And so I kind of would be pushing for everyone getting a bit of a ground in these technologies across the board, regardless of what their primary studies on. I think we're doing an injustice to every student who's leaving university without figuring
Well, I suppose just to say that it's overwhelming the sort of same sophistication and the real sophistication of the tools that are now available to sort of drive this matching at the level of tasks within jobs, and then work between jobs. It's really it's the new way of seemingly making those decisions really objective, but then also simultaneously quite fixed because of the reliance on data is something that we see reinforcing the same thing about predictions about the automatic loss of jobs as a result of certain estimations of technology, whereas really what James' work shows is that this is negotiated and there should be space for negotiation to drive towards better outcomes. So I suppose, for me, the question around this kind of notion of task matching and the way we increasingly make that objective through data-based mechanisms needs to be seen in the same way as how we understand how to come to impact labour markets. We need to create architectures for the voice of the people to shape that so that we can move from just matching to what Chris would describe as the good match, and that we're looking at in the project to think about finding a new equilibrium in which that might really flourish and get a sense of agency.
Perhaps looping that back to the survey, it's these excellent questions invite perhaps sharper attention on the capacity building part of people who are then, who then ideally would go on to be truly engaged in high involvement practices. So that perhaps is a policy direction that we should all pull out. Wrapping up very quickly, it's been a really amazing conversation. Thank you very much for coming. It's been a delight and honour to launch this survey as part of this review. Fantastic stuff now coming out through the years. We do follow it closely. Final remarks on this particular study, that I do think it's not just about the pace of the cognitive versus physical tasks. It does suggest that both the opportunities and the risks may be more than we previously recognised before, inviting perhaps a sharper policy focus on both ensuring risks are anticipated so that opportunities can be maximised, and moving towards more detailed thinking about how we can get to good automation and align different interests as best we can. And it really begins to take us, I think, along that path. We have a fantastic brief with both key findings and policy implications in full that you hopefully have all got or the link for. Thank you very much. Don't go yet. Have a welcome. Thank you.